Welcome. Washoe County Library System welcomes you to our monthly series, The Nevada Historical Society Presents High Noon with Neil Cobb. This afternoon's topic is Camels in the Comstock with writer, editor, and historian Eric Moody. And now I would like to introduce Sherry Hayes Zorn, curator of history at the Nevada Historical Society. Again, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Jennifer and John. We so appreciate you guys being able to help us even with last minute problems. So thank you, everybody. We are so happy to have you here today and gonna see a great program today. We're very excited about it. So I'm Sherry Hayes Zorn, and I'm the curator of history here at the Nevada Historical Society. And we're so happy to continue this great virtual program with the Washoe County Library System. It's made such a difference getting these wonderful programs recorded, as well as getting them out to a wider audience. Well, let me introduce our host with the most, our guest slash honorary curator, Neil Cobb. He's been a longtime supporter here for the Nevada Historical Society, and we so appreciate his dedication, trying to get the word out and helping share Nevada's history. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Neil Cobb. Hey, Neil.
Hi, thanks, Sherry. Our speaker today, Eric Moody, he wanted to complete his undergraduate concerns before he ever came to Nevada. So he had a chance to see a little bit of the country down there in Louisiana and their college, and up in New York and the college there. He finally made it to Nevada in 1968. And he was able to work just a little bit in 1970 for the Historical Society. And then later on, he was able to complete his employment. But while he was doing that, he was able to complete his master's degree at the University of Nevada and then his doctorate degree. He has been very active outside and inside the Historical Society. He is an author of quite a few different books, ran the beautiful magazine that we had from 2010 until 2017 called Nevada in the West. And that's a collector's item now, and you can talk to him about getting back copies. He has been able to bring other colleges into his loop as far as his major wealth of history, teaching down at Carson City and up at Truckee Meadows Community College and so on. So he's been very, very active. In fact, he owns a newspaper, or actually Nevada in the West, the corporation that he has, owns the very historical newspaper out of Austin, Nevada, that started in 1863, the Reese River Reveille. We got to get all of those R's just right. But he's very active with that, and he has contributed by adding indexes to books like Our Second, Reno Now and Then, anything and everything that he can do to promote the great history of the state of Nevada. His focus all the time that he was completing these other designations, his doctorate degree, it was focused strictly on history in the West, and of course, emanating from his base of operation in Reno. So at this time, I'd like to welcome our speaker today, Mr. Eric Moody.
Thank you, Neil. I have an unusual topic today to discuss, probably one that not too many people are familiar with, at least in the detail or to the extent that I have it here. But it is camels in the Comstock Austin freighting business of the 1860s. Most people who've lived in Nevada for any time at all know that there were camels here in the early days in the 1860s and 1870s. Most have also heard that the exotic beasts were used to carry salt from the interior of the state to mills on the flourishing Comstock lode, where it was used in processing silver ore. Less well known is the fact that camels were employed in general freighting, packing a variety of goods along the roads and trails of northern and central Nevada. The most important of the early trade routes was the one that developed between Virginia City and Austin and its satellite mining camps in the middle of the state. Between early 1863, when a wild rush to Austin and the Reese River country began, a steady stream of freight wagons pulled by mules or horses, stagecoaches, and pack trains of burros, mules, and camels flowed between Nevada's two largest and most populous mining centers. We should begin this tale with a few words about how and why camels became so involved in early Nevada freighting. Austin was in the center of the state in a very isolated area. A travel route, roughly approximating modern US Highway 50, existed between the new camp and the Comstock, though it was little more than a slightly improved trail. A segment of Nevada's Central Overland Trail, which had been established by Army Captain James Simpson's surveying expedition in 1859. The route was used by immigrant parties, the Pony Express, the overland mail stagecoaches and wagons also, but it was not an easy road for coaches and heavily loaded wagons. When the Reese River Rush got underway, the 170-mile-long trail was crowded with an immense amount of traffic. Fortune seekers on horseback, in coaches or wagons, or on foot were joined by freight wagons, some with 14 to 16 mule teams, and pack trains hauling food and supplies to the new mining district. The wagons and coaches certainly had a tough time negotiating the often sandy or rocky trail, but the going was easier for pack trains that could go cross-country at points where it was advantageous to do so. In fact, they didn't really need roads at all. All available freighting methods were called upon to meet the demands of the new mining area, and naturally camel trains were included. A small number of animals were already in Nevada, being used to haul salt from various places to the Comstock mills. Some salt freighters were procuring their product from a recently developed field at Sand Springs, east of present-day Fallon. It seemed to make sense to expand the number and activities of the camels, having them carry supplies out to Austin, then pick up salt on their way back to Virginia City. Camels, of course, had little difficulty in quickly crossing vast, arid expanses with their wide, padded, two-toed feet and long strides, and they needed less water than other animals being used in freighting. Nevada's heat and dry conditions were deadly for many mules and oxen in desert sections of the state. As odd as it may seem today, camels had a well-established presence in Nevada by 1863. This fact, of course, leads to an obvious question: how did they come to be here in the first place? Many people believe that Nevada's camels were remnants of the herds brought to the southwestern U.S. in the 1850s as part of the U.S. Army's Camel Corps experiment. Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, future president of the Confederacy, was responsible for importing these animals. The experiment failed, and by the mid-1860s, the last of the Army camels, virtually all of them single-humped dromedaries from North Africa and the Mediterranean, had been sold to private owners. Some of these animals did eventually make their way to Nevada, but they just added to the camel population already here. Nevada's first camels arrived late in 1861. They were two-humped Bactrian camels from Asia, which had been brought to California the previous year. In 1860, Otto Eschi, a German businessman living in San Francisco, traveled to Siberia where he purchased 32 camels brought from the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. Eshe, who knew that a camel could carry twice the load of a mule, hoped to start a camel train service from California to Nevada's booming Comstock. Eshe's camels, shaggy, dark beasts as they were described, were driven to the Amur River, which divides eastern Russia from extreme northeastern China, where the 15 survivors of the journey were loaded onto the schooner Caroline E. Foote and sent off to America. The ship arrived in San Francisco on July 25th, 1860, with its 15 camels in good condition. 2 died soon after arrival. 3 were sold, but at such low prices that the remaining 10 camels were held back and consigned to one Julius Bandeman, who pastured them in the San Francisco area. Otto Esche, however, was still optimistic about his camel venture. He secured several financial backers and returned to the Amur River by the summer of 1861. He had rounded up nearly 60 more camels and hired 2 native handlers. By the end of September, he had his animals loaded on 2 ships, the Caroline E. Foote, 10 camels, and the larger bark, Dollart, 44 camels. A few others had died while waiting for the vessels. The Caroline E. Foote arrived in San Francisco in November with all its camels in good shape. The Dollart, which Esche was traveling on, didn't make it to the Bay Area until February of 1862, and all but 20 of its camels had perished on the trip. Esche sued the captain of the Dollart over the loss of his 24 camels. All the surviving animals were entrusted to Julius Bandeman's care. While Esche was away on his second trip to Asia, Bandeman had come up with a plan to make money from the camels that he did hold. They would be used to carry salt from the interior of Nevada to the ore reduction mills on the Comstock. Thus, in September 1861, he drove 9 of his 10 camels across the Sierra on speculation to Virginia City, where it appears he hoped to try them out in the salt trade and then sell them to some enterprising operator. Fortunately for us, an artist named Edward Fisher accompanied the camel drive to Nevada and sketched the caravan at various places along the way. The newly arrived beasts of burden were quickly put to work carrying salt from the salt marshes far to the south, the Columbus Salt Marsh, and after mid-1862, the Rhodes Salt Marsh. A north-south camel trail actually developed, one that passed along the east shore of Walker Lake and past Fort Churchill to Virginia City. After 1862, new deposits of salt were discovered or began to be developed in locations closer to Virginia City, and the focus of the salt business shifted away from the marshes down to the south. By mid-1863, the Comstock's mills were having virtually all of their industrial salt hauled in from places to the east, out in Nevada's interior, Nevada's central interior. It seems that Bandeman himself took charge of his camels in their salt packing and found that they were well suited to the work. At first, the camels carried only about 500 pounds of salt, but with the cargo selling at $120 a ton, each trip of a camel caravan made money. In succeeding years, as the price of salt fell, the camels' loads got heavier, some animals eventually carrying up to 1,000 pounds. Sometime in the summer or fall of 1862, 2 French brothers, Marius and Louis Chevalier, bought all of the Bandeman camels, either from him or some other party that had acquired them. Virginia City's territorial enterprise observed that the animals were being sold, even though they had made a clear $900 for their owners in the last 2 months. The Chevaliers were familiar with camels, Lewis had served with the French army in North Africa, and they believed that they too could turn a profit using them in the freighting business. They took the camels to their ranch on the Carson River between Dayton and Fort Churchill. From late 1862 into the first quarter of 1864, it appears that the only camels based in northern Nevada, certainly the only ones being used commercially in any prominent way, were those that belonged to the Chevalier brothers. Not only were the Chevaliers profitably employing the animals in pack trains carrying salt from the southern marshes and later the closer salt fields to the east, but they were successfully breeding them. Their herd on the Carson River Ranch steadily increased in size, even before the last of Otto Esche's camels, numbering 15, were purchased by the Chevaliers in March 1864 and brought to Nevada. During 1864, Samuel McLennigan, a Californian who had bought the remaining 34 of the Army's camels early that year, was also involved briefly in Nevada camel freighting. In partnership with his half-brother, a man named Laflamme, he brought 10 of the beasts to the Comstock area, loaded with freight from Sacramento's Greenwood and Company. Accompanying the pack train was Haj Ali, also known as Haj Jolly, an experienced Middle Eastern camel handler whose services McLennigan had acquired. The camels were stabled in Dayton, in George Leslie's stone barn and corral. The building has ever since been known as the Camel Barn. McLennigan, like the Chevaliers, used his camels for whatever freighting was available. Only some of this activity now involved salt, an ever cheaper commodity. However, he found no profit in freighting and soon sold his camels. McLennigan made one more try at the business in 1865, when he brought the rest of his camels over the Sierra to the Silver State. But again, it was difficult to make money with them in competition with the area's established freighting companies. He and Laflamme soon headed off to Arizona with most of their animals. According to a contemporary observer, Hermann Hoffmann, a German brewer who lived in Virginia City during 1864-65, a third freighting operation utilizing camels was active at that time, but we unfortunately don't know any more about that. It was in the first months of 1863 that the rush to the Reese River district began. This mining excitement followed the late 1862 discovery of rich silver ore in Pony Canyon, where Austin sprang up. The town of Clifton, at the mouth of the canyon, developed first and became a substantial community before almost everyone decided to move up the canyon closer to the mines. By the spring of 1863, hundreds of buildings had been erected in Austin and Clifton, and the trail between those places and Virginia City was constantly filled with eager migrants and freighters, the latter carrying supplies to the boom towns in their wagons and pack trains. The Chevaliers, and at least for one trip, Samuel McLennigan, participated in the new Reese River trade with heavily loaded camel trains. Exactly what the arrangements were with their suppliers, we don't know. The camel trains may have been hired by hard-pressed freighting companies to supplement their pack trains or mule-drawn wagons, or the camels may have been employed directly by merchants trying to get their goods delivered to the new Reese River boom towns. We do know that camels first got to Clifton sometime in the early months of 1863, just as the rush was gathering steam and the district's mushrooming population needed food and all kinds of supplies. The camel trains went out to the Austin-Clifton area, bearing goods from Virginia City, and they arrived back on the Comstock loaded with sacks of salt. On their way back, the camels normally picked up salt from the works of the Sand Springs Salt Mining Company, which were located in Churchill County on the wide flat beside Sand Springs Station, next to Sand Mountain. There were, of course, some variations on the route just described. Other salt mining companies operating in the general Austin area seem to have provided, at least on occasion, cargo for some of the returning caravans. One was the Humboldt Salt Mining Company, which worked deposits at the Humboldt Salt Marsh in Dixie Valley, about 50 miles northwest of Austin, and some 40 miles north of the Virginia City-Austin Road. With its main office in Unionville, it contracted with Comstock mining companies to provide salt for their mills. Usually the salt was hauled by mule-drawn wagons, although in September of 1863, a Virginia City newspaper reported that a train of camels was, quote, running from the Humboldt salt mines to this city, packing salt for the Humboldt Salt Company. Another salt business in the Austin area was the Smoky Valley Salt Company, which harvested at Spaulding's Salt Marsh, located approximately 20 miles south of Austin, near the Lander County line. The Smoky Valley Company maintained a depot in Austin for receiving orders and distributing its products. The Reese River Reveille, Austin's pioneer newspaper, carried a story about camels in its first issue on May 16, 1863. Titled "A Sad Occurrence," it reported the death of a young camel that had been foaled at Clifton in February or March. It had been presented to the Gilson brothers, who took it to their ranch at nearby Simpson's Park. There, according to the paper, the young brute grew apace and gave great promise of future vigor and beauty, as well as usefulness, but it came to an unfortunate end. Around the 1st of May, it somehow plunged head first into a 3 to 4 foot deep well and drowned. M.J. Farrell, who arrived in Austin in April 1863, recalled decades later the turbulent first year of the camp, and that it was given an air of oriental magnificence, as he said, when the stream of arriving wagons and pack trains one day included a long train of camels loaded to an astonishing extent. He recollected not only the exotic animals, but the crowds they attracted. As this event would have been in April or later, the camel caravan Farrell witnessed had to have been at least the second one into the Austin-Clifton area. Camels continued to haul provisions to Austin during the next several years, until the Central Pacific Railroad's tracks crossed central Nevada in 1868. By that time, goods were generally being shipped by rail to the closest point near Austin, and then freighted by wagon on the last leg of their journey. In early April of 1864, a train of 15 camels loaded with about 6,000 pounds of goods for A. Mao and Company's general store came into Austin one evening. The arrival apparently planned to avoid any daytime interaction with horses and mules who got spooked by the camels. A week later, the camels were reported to be back in Virginia City, resting from their labor of packing salt from the eastern deserts. 3 months later, the Reese River Reveille announced that a train of 13 camels had just delivered 5,500 pounds of freight, with 2 of the largest animals carrying 700 pounds each. The camels, on their way back to Virginia City, were to pick up salt from Sand Springs and were due to return to Austin in the course of a month. Early in October, the Reveille took note of an 8-camel caravan that had pulled into Austin from Folsom, California, loaded with flour for S.C. Baker and Company. The camels, it was said, had traveled 40 miles on the day of their arrival, but they did not seem at all to be wearied, and they departed the next day. The speed and often endurance of the camels in the West was often remarked upon, even though the animals often had to have their feet wrapped in leather to protect them from extremely cold weather or rough and rocky ground, terrain of the sort encountered along the route between Virginia City and Austin. The Chevalier brothers, who tried to take good care of their animals in the challenging Nevada environment, appeared to be keeping busy and to be making money from their pack trains, but Camels did not turn a profit for all their owners. At Virginia City in October 1864, Lamon and Palmer conducted an auction of 10 camels, undoubtedly those that Samuel McLennigan had brought to Nevada earlier in the year. They sold for a disappointing $100 to $200 each, about as much as mules would have sold for. Camels, a newspaper editorialized at the time, have proved less profitable in this country than was expected. Marius and Louis Chevalier, who bought the camels, of course, would have disagreed. In the middle of December, the Comstock newspapers took note of about a dozen camels passing through the streets of Virginia City on their way to be packed with provisions and supplies of various kinds destined for Reese River. The animals, which appeared to be in fine condition, presented a most formidable appearance. They were covered with a full-grown fleece of hair, which in some is nearly a foot in length, and were all the more intimidating for their dark color. William Epler, who lived in Humboldt County in the early to mid-1860s, later recalled that the camels he saw were often very large and were nearly as black as buffaloes, not your little straw-colored fellows you usually see with a circus. Another place camels were occasionally seen was the Carson City area. There is a photograph taken probably in the mid-1870s of a camel in a parade on Carson City's main street. A festively dressed woman and someone who might be a camel handler, possibly High Jolly, are riding the beast as it passes in front of the Arlington House Hotel. This is the only known photograph of a camel in 19th century Nevada. Camel freighting in northern Nevada remained brisk through the middle part of the 1860s, finally being conducted probably exclusively by the Chevalier brothers. Even though the price of salt continued to decline, eventually falling to $80 a ton, the demand for goods in the central Nevada mining camps, like Austin, remained strong. While road conditions improved and increasing numbers of wagons and coaches became involved in freighting, camels were still a prominent feature of the business. Salt packing became secondary to hauling food supplies and merchandise. Trips out of the Comstock became more profitable than those heading back into the area. Still, carrying cheap salt back to Virginia City was better than making the return trip with no cargo at all. The picturesque comings and goings of camels between Virginia City and Gold Hill and the other communities of the Comstock and the Reese River country continued to attract the attention of newspaper writers. Near the end of February 1866, a 12-camel train arrived in Austin from the Comstock, carrying 5,500 pounds of merchandise for Albert Mau's General Store. The caravan, composed of both one- and two-humped camels, had taken 13 days to make the trip because of cold, snowy conditions, and most of the camels had their feet made tender by the snow, bound in leather. Among the camels, it was noted, were a number of mere youngsters carrying light loads of 50 to 60 pounds. In April of the same year, a train of 12 camels pulled into Austin loaded with 6,000 pounds of goods for the Mau store. And on September 10th, according to the Reveille, our humpbacked friends, including several youngsters, were back in town with another 7,000 pounds of freight for Mau. On occasion, the camels engaged in the Virginia City-Austin merchandise and salt trade were pressed into other, presumably profitable, activities. In March of 1867, the Reveille ran a story about a small train of 5 camels that left Austin for the Milk Springs and Empire districts. They were to return packing ore for reduction at one of our mills. Indications are that camel participation in Virginia City Austin freighting declined during 1867 and may have pretty much ended the next year when the Central Pacific Railroad completed most of its line through Nevada. The tracks reached Battle Mountain, 90 miles directly north of Austin, in the fall of 1868. Camels continued to be used in the state as pack animals, but it appears more modestly. In May 1867, the Territorial Enterprise reported on a train of 6 grown camels, accompanied by a 3-week-old young one, that had brought a load of coal to the city. The next week, it was said, these camels and 11 others from the ranch of their owner on the Fort Churchill Road would be loaded and sent off for the Silver Bend mines. This was the new Central Nevada mining camp of Belmont. Travelers on the Fort Churchill Road, mentioned above, sometimes had to watch out for roaming camels. In October 1868, the Territorial Enterprise reported in a piece titled "The Camel Nuisance" that a carriage conveying Comstock dignitaries, Judge Alexander W. Baldwin and General Thomas H. Williams, was almost wrecked when its team of horses was spooked by the appearance of camels and ran away with their passengers. The incident led to calls for the camels to be kept on the south side of the river, away from the public road on the north side. The Enterprise also commented, "The soldiers from the fort hate the camels beyond measure and fire at them every time their animals are frightened by them." Through the middle 1870s, camels could still be spotted in and around the Comstock communities, hauling hay, firewood, and sometimes still even freight for stores. Invariably, they were seen on streets only after dark, when horses and mules were safely stabled. Camels had pretty much been replaced in major freighting activities by 1875, when the state legislature finally dealt with the long-standing camel problem by prohibiting them from public roads and highways. The Chevaliers still maintained camels on their ranch, but with the economic usefulness of the beasts severely limited, the brothers eventually had to give up on them. In 1877, they took their growing herd, about 40 head, to Yuma, Arizona, hoping to sell them. There proved to be no market for the camels there, and the animals were turned loose. So this ended the colorful story of Nevada's camels, except, of course, for those that appear today in Virginia City's modern camel races. But that's another story for another day. The picture that you see right now is the cover of a booklet by Doug McDonald that was published in 1983. And it has the best general overview of camels in Nevada. It does not go into the Austin Comstock freighting episodes as much as we have here, but as I said, it's a good overview of the camels and their use in Nevada, and also has a concise account of the modern camel races, how they got started and how they were conducted, at least in the early years. That is the story that I have for today.
Well, Eric, that was great. Let's get you put back your camera on here and see what kind of questions we might have from the general public here. Well, I think it was an amazing story, and I learned so much about the camels as a whole. It's quite fascinating. I didn't realize there were that many private business people that actually owned camels at the time. So that's quite fascinating in itself, and how the Chevaliers brothers just kept kind of purchasing more of the camels. It sounds like they were at least the best. Oh, sorry. Thank you. The best, owners, at least in the way of trying to help take care of their animals. So
You could say they were the camel kings of Nevada in their day.
I love it. Okay, I've got a few questions here. So you know how some of those illustrations, I don't know if they're Harper's, but is there a specific book that you were able to glean some of these images from about the camels? That was one of the questions.
The images came from a variety of sources, most of them at the Nevada Historical Society's library.
Yeah.
And the pictures of camels on the trail between Virginia City and Austin, it's actually just one engraving. There are two variations of it. One appeared in Harper's, and the other one was used much later in another book about Nevada and travel in the West, Echoes from the Rocky Mountains by, I think it was J.D. Clampett. And he used a variation of the original Harper's drawing. But those are
That's
the
what I
only,
was wondering. Okay.
those are the only
Yeah.
contemporary pictures.
So the book, the drawings, the sketches, when they were coming from the Sierras, who was the artist? You were talking about they had somebody come along to do some of the sketches. I was curious about those images too, because there was at least one or two, right?
Yes, his name was Vischer, a German
Okay.
artist who accompanied them, and I was those also are at the Nevada Historical Society. You do have at least reproductions of the images that he created.
Okay.
Of course,
Okay.
from 1861.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Was the Carson River had clean, safe drinking water for the camels, or was there concerns for the camels, with the leaching, or was that still kind of early? Wasn't affecting the water as much?
Yeah, I think that was been a little too early for that
Okay.
concern.
Yeah.
My guess is that most of the water that the camels consumed would have come from wells, but they could well have consumed water from the river.
Okay. Well, you see how, some cattle, drink along the water. So I wasn't sure if camels could be this, be doing the same thing. How is salt used in the mining process is another question that
That's a technical question that I'm not really, I don't want to get into. I'm not an authority in that area. Probably the best sources of information would be some of the books about the Comstock and mining at the time. Again, there are a variety of those at the Nevada Historical Society. So
yeah.
it
Okay.
was used to reduce the ore so that you could separate the silver from the ore.
So is it
itself.
kind of like part of the leaching process, kind of, I guess?
Yes, it was used in the mills there.
Okay. Okay.
The ore was crushed and then the salt was mixed with it.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Then I have another question. The Gold Hill drawing, are these are there church steeples in the picture? I'm not sure. Is it that Gold Hill drawing? Is it kind of some of the buildings, maybe that there was a church in it? I'm not sure the question. I know that, you had nice scenes of Austin, and there was at least a scene of Gold Hill, but I don't remember seeing church steeples within the landscape.
It was a general scene of Gold Hill, and
Okay.
I think mills and mines, and there could well have been a church in the background.
Okay.
I don't have that right in front of me. But
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I was trying to think too, because like a lot of times you see it kind of as a Main Street kind of view thing. Okay, so you had mentioned, that one owner actually had hired trained camel, care provider. Um, do you know how you were talking about some of the deaths of the camels that were being documented? Did any of the drivers or caretaker, did you ever come across any references that any of them got injured by their camels or died possibly?
I did not find anything in that
Okay.
regard. Usually it was a case of the camels being injured or dying from
Okay.
lack of qualified handlers.
I
That
see
was why
something.
they were important to have somebody here who was experienced in the area. And one of the reasons that the camels were not as efficient in use in freighting is that you did not always have qualified handlers. It's just difficult to get them here, obviously.
Okay, well, that would make sense, and the fact about them having to wrap leather around their feet. So camels, they don't require shoeing, say, as versus horses
No,
or mules?
they do have soft pads rather than hooves,
Oh,
like
okay,
mules or horses would have had. So
okay,
their feet could be damaged by rocks or hard surfaces. And as that one story that I quoted indicated,
yeah,
icy cold weather also was not
yeah,
only uncomfortable, but it could damage the pads on their feet. So an
okay,
entirely different problem that you had than with horses, where you had to keep them shod.
yeah,
But the camels had to have their feet wrapped. Sometimes they used leather booties on them. I've seen those also. And sometimes the wrapping was more informal, just leather wrapped and tied on.
okay. Like today's, where some owners have little booties for their dogs to go outside.
Yes, along that line.
Um, so I don't know if I've ever noticed or seen in our collection Doug McDonald's book of the camels in Nevada. Um, I do you, I know we have some artwork of his for another book he was working on. Do you remember if we potentially have the artwork for that book in his collection or just in our prints?
I'm not remembering any artwork for the book. The book itself
Okay.
is there, but the artwork,
Yeah.
I don't think ever
Okay.
got to the Historical Society's library.
Okay. Well, I just remember some of the other, and so I was curious whether or not you remembered or not, since you have such a good memory.
No.
Well, I know the Beer brothers that were in Virginia City were using camels, or at least when I was doing a little research on them, because they were dealt with grocery, they were using camels as well. So do you think that like the grocers or they might have been trying to ship groceries from Virginia City to Carson and kind of in the area would use camels too? I mean, because you were saying, they were kind of getting away from some of the salt towards that secondary, and they were, getting into wood and, still doing provisions. I was just kind of curious.
They were used locally on the Comstock
Okay.
around Virginia City.
Yeah.
They were there were problems. Obviously, you couldn't use them in connection with horses or around horses or mules, because they did not like the camels, and
Yeah.
usually camels had to be unloaded later at night, and when the horses weren't on the streets. But as the salt trade declined, and as the boom in Austin subsided as the 1860s went on, camels were pressed into more local freighting business around the Comstock, but it just wasn't as profitable
Okay.
as hauling the salt and goods out to Reese River. And
Okay.
they were used, but not to any really great extent. They were probably used hauling firewood and that sort of thing more than anything
Okay.
else.
Okay. We have another question. A great presentation, Eric. Did they ever raise camels back in the day? Or were camels ever eaten in the mining camps?
Uh, they were raised. The Chevalier brothers did breed camels on their
Okay.
ranch. And there was that one camel that died out in the early days near Austin,
Right.
which was, as they said, foaled at the ranch out there. But
Right.
as far as I know, the only camels that were raised in the state were on the Chevalier's ranch down on the Carson River. And
Okay.
it was a relatively small number of them.
Okay. We have another question. Great talk. Can you speak about the reports of wild camel sightings that occurred in Nevada and California throughout the early 1900s?
Mhm. Yes, those were never substantiated. There were stories of camels being sighted, either individuals or small groups of them up into the early 1900s. There's even a bizarre story of a camel being sighted with a skeleton, strapped on the back of it or in a decomposing saddle, something like that. But again, that's never been substantiated. So probably the camels, if they were set loose in the desert, didn't survive too long. But the stories certainly have survived longer than the camels ever did.
Okay. Were camels ever used in other areas in Nevada? Or because I know you were saying that they were brought from California into Nevada. Were they also like that first, you were talking about flour came from California. Was California using camels much, or was it mainly Nevada?
It
Do
was
you
just
know?
occasionally when somebody
Okay.
had the camels and bringing them to the desert of Nevada.
Oh,
But that
okay.
was probably not a regular occurrence. More common was the use of the camels from the salt marshes down around Columbus in the early 1860s. And
Okay.
they were used in that for a while, but when the sources of salt closer to the Comstock were discovered, the use of camels shifted to the shorter routes and to the Austin, Virginia City routes.
Okay. Okay. Very interesting. The earlier pictures showed only two hump camels, but a quote you read mentioned both one and two humps. You were talking about the breeds. Do you know when the single hump camels came? I know you were kind of talking about both, but
Yeah, they both were used here in Nevada. The Bactrian camels were the two hump, shaggy, dark camels, and those were the first ones that came into the state. By the time the Army camels, the remnants of the Army camels were coming in, those I think were primarily dromedaries, the one-humped camels.
Okay.
So both of them ended up here in Nevada, and both were used in the freighting business here.
Okay. Okay. I find it interesting about the Army, using them for a while. But just, it's kind of sad. So another question. So presumably the camels that got away or were let loose died out over time. So was it Nevada's environment that couldn't support the camels in the wild? Not enough water, a little of everything.
It was probably a variety of reasons that they didn't survive on their own. And there weren't really that many that were set loose. Some here, some out on the California desert, some in the Arizona deserts.
Okay.
But they obviously did not flourish and multiply. So you had wild roaming herds of camels. They disappeared rather quickly.
Okay. Well, if like you were mentioning with their feet being sensitive and needing to be taken care of, that they're definitely an animal that needs extra care versus just roaming the desert. don't know. It's a fascinating program, and there's just so much history. And yet, okay, I do have one question. I knew there was something I was thinking about. So 1875, I mean, they've already restricted the camels from, being on the roads during the day. It's more evening. The camels are not being used as much. They're not as many as it sounds like, and with the law that went into effect in 1875, wasn't there something about a fine that people could get by owning or having them on the roads with the legislation that occurred during that time? I don't remember. It's just a little bits of it. Do you remember?
It's been a long time since I looked at the statute, so I'm sure
Okay.
there were penalties involved.
Okay.
But I don't recall exactly what they were. And the
Okay.
problem with the camels was, well, there weren't that many of them. They did make themselves a nuisance with the wrong people, like the party of dignitaries on the Churchill Road, or prominent business figures in Virginia City who
Yeah.
didn't want the camels around. They weren't really needed by that time, and they were just a nuisance.
Okay. Oh, okay. There's another question. Did camels breed with any other animals out in the wild in Nevada? I mean, a lot of times they don't, but that is a question. I don't know if I've ever heard of that before, but
No, I'm not familiar with any hybrids that
like
developed
the liger,
their presence. No, that didn't happen. I'm reasonably
Okay.
sure.
I gave you my thought too, but you never know. I mean, first time I heard of a liger, I'm like, what? You could actually see them. So is there any other things you want to mention? I mean, how'd you get into this, I guess, this topic? It's fascinating about camels. I know you're interested in many topics, but I was just curious how you got into learning more about camels.
Probably just from seeing some accounts of the camel caravans, the pack trains, which I was not really familiar with either.
Yeah.
And I just have a penchant for getting into topics and subjects in Nevada history that haven't been explored. And I certainly haven't done anything definitive on the use of camels in commercial enterprise in Nevada. This is just what I've discovered so far. And I thought it was an interesting story that is not generally known. So I started writing about it, but there certainly needs to be more work done on it. For instance, what were the business arrangements between the camel operators, the owners of the camels, and the companies that they hauled salt or goods for, mining companies or commercial businesses? We don't know at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, trying to track down business and business records can be difficult. So it would be great though if you could find something. So thank you so much, Eric, and thank you everybody. And I'll send it back to Jennifer and John. So thank you so much, guys. We always appreciate you guys helping us get these great programs out there.
Well, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, all of you. We really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who joined us. Thanks, Sherry Hayes-Zorn, Neil Cobb, Eric Moody, and John, our Washoe County Library Tech Wizard, for making this event possible today. Thanks so much.